To wrap up our first panel of the morning here, Kramer Russell, who comes to us from the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, where she is the Associate Curator of Native American Art. She received her bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Denver, her master's also in anthropology from George Washington University just in 2000, although she's been with Peabody Essex for about 10 years now, and also served as a junior project manager at the National Museum of the American Indian. She's worked on a number of projects, including two inaugural exhibitions at the National Museum of the American Indian. She recently co-curated Peabody Essex exhibition on intersections, Native American art in a new light, and she is presently curating a large-scale traveling exhibition. Is it going to come through Oklahoma by any chance? Well, perhaps it will come through Oklahoma on historic and contemporary Native American art, set for 2011. In addition, she is also the Vice President of the Native American Art and Studies Association, which is holding its biennial conference in Norman, Oklahoma this October. So if any of you are interested in that, you'll want to catch her on the break and ask her about that. So please join me in welcoming Kramer Russell.
Good morning. Let's see. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I just want to get my PowerPoint presentation up and running. Okay. I want to extend my sincere thanks to the University of Tulsa College of Law for having me participate in this important symposium, Exhibiting Culture, Museums, and Indians. It is an honor to be here with such esteemed speakers and to be here at the Gilcrease Museum. Special thanks to Professor Judy Royster, Dean Levitt, and Chief Jim Gray, as well as to Dr. King for hosting us here at the beautiful Gilcrease. Before I begin, I'm just wondering who here has heard of the Peabody Essex Museum? Oh, there's a number of you. Good. So it's not just, Salem is not just about witches, right? My goal this morning is to provide you with a brief history of our collecting, exhibition, and interpretive history of Native American art and culture at the Peabody Essex Museum, which I'll refer to as PEM. Our history of exhibiting, interpreting, and collecting Native American art and culture spans 210 years. I also want to use PEM's collection as a case study to explore how it correlates to larger national movements of museology and at times federal policy. Oops. Founded in 1799, PEM is one of America's oldest museums, and since our inception, we have collected, displayed, and interpreted Native American art and cultural objects in a variety of ways, each rooted in the conscious and unconscious attitudes of their time. Our collection numbers about 20,000 works and encompasses over 10,000 years of human creativity in the Americas, the majority of which is early 19th century to the present from North America. The superior quality of individual works, its breadth, sheer size, and provenance ranks it among the most important collections in the world and the oldest ongoing collection in the Western Hemisphere. PEM occupies a unique position from which to reflect on past and current approaches to displaying, interpreting, and collecting Native American objects. Members of the East India Marine Society, our founding institution, collected most of the earliest Native American acquisitions. Established as an elite organization, as Salem rose in importance as a center for maritime trade, society members were global entrepreneurs, sea captains, and traders who traveled the world in search of commerce. These sea captains and supercargoes collected natural and artificial curiosities from beyond the Cape of Good Hope or Cape Horn and formed a museum for the enrichment and delight of friends and family in Salem. By the 1820s, the collection had outgrown its display capacity in a rented hall, and a building was built for the collection and also for society gatherings called East India Marine Hall, which is what you see here. This space is a cornerstone of the museum campus. In the earliest years of the Society, through the 1830s, Native American objects were shown as part of an eclectic cabinet of curiosities reflecting Enlightenment sensibilities that had, of course, been at play in Europe for decades by this point, as Rebecca was referring to earlier. And it also reflected emerging American nationalism and related attitudes toward the exoticness of Native Americans, Asians, Africans, and Pacific Islanders represented in the Society's diverse collections. This is a drawing of East Indy Marine Hall as it looked somewhere between 1830 and 1867. So you can see the literal cabinets of curiosities in the center and on both sides, and also an early 19th century Greenland kayak and the oldest known full-size birch bark Passamaquoddy canoe in the front by the windows. And you'll see this canoe and kayak in a couple other iterations. So just 16 years after the establishment of the United States, sea captains were going out into the world for the very first time. And through social contact and business relationships with local officials, they were collecting curiosities. However, the singular nature and superior quality of many of the individual works they collected suggest to me that these pieces were likely gifted and possibly received more as objects of diplomacy, not just mere objects of curiosity. Sea otter furs on the Pacific Northwest coast proved remarkably profitable cargo for Salem ships in China trade. And on the left here, we see the earliest known Chilkat Blanket from a Tlingit community on the Northwest coast, donated to the museum by Captain Robert Bennett Forbes in 1832. And on the right is one of 14 known masks depicting the Haida ancestress to the eagle moiety, Gillicons. It's the earliest known mask from this early period, donated by Captain Daniel Cross in 1827. Salem trade with South America was also extensive and resulted in some important pieces to the collection, including remarkable featherwork, as in these two headdresses, collected in the Amazon River Valley by Henry Upton and Matthew Shepard between 1821 and 1853. Other Native American art made its way into the collection in the 19th century by way of missionary and military activity, and also through family connections. And these two sashes are probably Choctaw, both from the 19th century, and the one on the left was collected in the 1830s by an American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions missionary person. Salem was the hub for the ABCFM between 1830 and 1870, and we house some very excellent and early material from this activity. And on the right-hand side is a sash that was collected by a Massachusetts person, Massachusetts resident Joseph Gary Heald, who, as a licensed trader in the 1840s, owned a non-native supply house in Dokesville on the Choctaw Reservation in Indian Territory. So here is a view of East Indy Marine Hall today. You can see the original cabinets with displays very much true to the cabinet of curiosity approach. In the 1860s, as Salem declined as a seaport and center of trade, the East Indy Marine Society experienced waning membership and financial troubles. So in 1867, George Peabody created the Peabody Academy of Science, which subsumed East Indy Marine Society museum holdings, as well as natural history collections from Salem's Essex Institute. And with the museum's transformation came the optimism of modernity. Extensive renovations to the museum's galleries produced new systematic exhibitions that followed the latest classifications of biology, geology, and ethnology. On the left, we see an 1860s view of our East Hall gallery, which is adjacent to East Indy Marine Hall. And you can see specimen types that are grouped together. And on the left, you can see in the center there are boats, and the Passamaquoddy canoe and kayak are there. And on the right-hand side is an 1880s view of the same East Hall gallery. The boats now are in the rear, displayed on top of the upper mezzanine cases. By the last part of the 19th century, as Darwin's theory of evolution was coming to light and Native Americans were being documented tirelessly, incorrectly thought of then as a dying, vanishing race. At this time, the museum continued to focus on developing science-based systematic collections and exhibitions. In this 1892 view of East Hall, you can see the South American ceramics, featherwork, and other objects displayed, and on the lower right is that same Amazonian headdress seen earlier. Here, the museum took an almost natural history approach, displaying like objects as non-functioning specimens and artifacts, certainly not as artistic creations. As in East India Marine Hall and other East Hall displays, there were very few labels offering information or cultural context. These pieces were not seen at the time as part of a continuum of any modern world and really didn't need any explanation. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Peabody Academy of Science reinvented itself again and became the Peabody Museum of Salem, and the museum focused more inward on local history. Native American objects displayed in East Hall remained relatively untouched throughout much of the 20th century. Nonetheless, acquisitions continued, slowly but steadily, including this 19th century Chumash basket from California, and a pair of 19th century moccasins from the Northeast on the right-hand side. During the 1970s and 80s, there were increasing efforts to include cultural context and aesthetic considerations in exhibitions. However, the overwhelming thrust of the institution and its public perception was as an institution by and about Salem sea captains. It wasn't until the 1990s that the museum broke free from prior historical orientation. In 1992, the Peabody Museum of Salem merged with the Essex Institute to become the Peabody Essex Museum and began to concentrate more on art and culture and less on history proper, celebrating form, design, context, and continuities of artistic and cultural creativity. Under the leadership of our executive director, Dan Monroe, the museum embarked on a multi-year, multi-million-dollar expansion and renovation project. NAGPRA was still fairly new at the time, and again, under Dan's leadership, we carried NAGPRA's spirit of collaboration into our program by proactively committing ourselves to collecting contemporary Native American art and to working collaboratively with contemporary Native artists and scholars. In 1996, we mounted a special traveling exhibition and catalog that underscored these programmatic changes. Gifts of the Spirit had 5 curators, including 2 Native guest curators, Suzanne Harjo and Rick Hill, and brought together 19th century works from the Peabody Essex Museum collection, and these were shown alongside of contemporary works borrowed from artists and collections across the country. This was our first real attempt at displaying objects as art, albeit about 55 years behind the Museum of Modern Art's 1941 seminal exhibition, Indian Art of the United States, that emphasized art and aesthetics. Rather than grouping the objects chronologically or geographically, we chose a thematic approach. Each work was displayed by itself and wasn't grouped into cases or on the walls en masse as in the ethnology displays. The labels called out anonymous artist for much of the 19th century works, signaling to our visitors that an individual artist, even if we don't know their name, created these works rather than an entire tribe. As you can see from the image on the right, our strategy was to juxtapose 19th century works with contemporary art, emphasizing continuities between past and present. As well, we incorporated quotes and video footage of contemporary artists into the exhibition, an interpretive strategy that our visitors responded very well to. And here's another view of some of that exhibition. Subsequent special exhibitions based on the museum's holdings with a focus on art and culture have included Indian Market, New Directions in Southwestern Native American Pottery, we did in 2001, and a traveling exhibition we did called Uncommon Legacies in 2002, representing further attempts at layering interpretation, themes, and time frames. Again, cases in these exhibitions held individual objects, and we worked with a group of Native consultants. In June of 2003, PEM underwent a dramatic transformation expressed both physically through 250,000 square feet of new and renovated facilities and intellectually through a complete reformulation of the museum's mission and interpretive philosophy. This recent initiative expanded, reconfigured, and transformed the 210-year-old institution, enabling us to showcase our outstanding collection of contemporary and historic art and culture from around the world. The new museum fulfills our deepened commitment to exhibitions and interpretation, scholarship, programs, and acquisitions, which have increasingly focused on creativity, cultural context, and the complex relationships that connect art to the world in which it is made. Included in the new museum campus are changing exhibition galleries, and one of the first exhibitions that the Native American Art and Culture Department unveiled within this new museum paradigm was Our Land, Contemporary Art from the Arctic, which we did between 2004 and 2005. I was the co-curator of this exhibition, which was a collaborative project between PEM and the governments of Canada and Nunavut. The show celebrated the growth of Inuit creative expression over the past 5 decades. Interpretive labels and text panels emphasizing the perspective of Inuit elders, artists, writers, and other community members were provided in both English and Inuktitut, the Inuit language that is strikingly graphic in its design and composition, as you can see here from the slide on the right. A likeness of the northern lights appeared on the vaulted ceilings of our house galleries, giving the galleries a very subtle ambiance. As well, another deliberate design as interpretation decision was made to display as many objects as possible without plexiglass bonnets, rendering visitors with a perceived increased accessibility to the material. The show also had several new media components, including a 3-dimensional flyover map of the United States that took you all the way north to Nunavut, and 4 flat screens showing film work by Zacharias Kunuk, the award-winning Inuit filmmaker, director, and producer. And as well, there was a special touchscreen sound station featuring selections of Inuit throat singing and contemporary music. Also included in the new museum is a 3,700 square foot gallery dedicated to showcasing the unique richness and range of the Native American art collection and emphasize aesthetic strengths of and cross-cultural connections between individual objects. In June of 2006, I co-curated Intersections, Native American Art in a New Light, an exhibition that transcends the boundaries of time and geography and materials and techniques to explore identity, politics, and cultural exchange in Native American art. Intersections has 75 artworks and is divided between 3 sections that offer perspectives on Native American art and culture. Metaphor and Identity explores personal and cultural identities and how these are expressed visually. Continuity and Innovation examines intercultural influences in Native American art and illuminates the dialogue between tradition and innovation. And Icons and Politics addresses the question of what it means to be Native American in a changing world. And through the interplay of historic objects and contemporary works, this section attempts to invert popular stereotypes. The 3 thematic sections are interconnected, and the exhibition design reflects this through sculptural backdrops that also serve as wall dividers. The open floor plan encourages visitors to make visual connections within and between the divisions. The show reflects the museum's core values, which really do drive the show's criteria, choices, and approaches. Again, we take a thematic approach. There is no chronology or geographic areas. We have objects that are grouped together that encourage our visitors to make comparisons and to contrast, but do comparisons and contrast between objects. And objects also emphasize connections between and within thematic categories. And overall, our visitors respond to the show very positively. One of the negatives would be that our visitors find it very hard to bridge 19th century works with contemporary art. They come to they come to the museum expecting Native American art to be one thing, and sometimes contemporary art isn't what they expect, and so it's hard for them to sort of reconcile the two. And the other thing is that we don't have any maps in this exhibition, and so it's hard for our visitors to figure out where the pieces are from. Intersections is the second exhibition in this space since PEM's reopening in 2003. The full expression of the museum's Native American curatorial program is still being realized. We seek to foster a culture of respectful inquiry between Native and non-Native artists, scholars, tradition bearers, and museum visitors. It is a process that starts and continues in dialogue, in the development of exhibitions, staff exchanges, internships, and collection sharing, through the implementation of NAGPRA, and through the development and presentation of publications, lectures, demonstrations, films, online resources, and other digital media. This initiative is premised on the idea that our collection is a living network of artworks, their makers and their viewers, together with the ideas and attitudes that flow between them. No museum is merely an assemblage of things, but a microcosm of human interaction, engagement, and inquiry. Within a museum setting, we are seeking interpretive approaches that move beyond the biased historical narratives of the past. What can art mean to our museum visitors, given the frequently vast differences in culture, language, and worldview between artist and viewer? As a people-centered museum, our resources are dedicated to providing compelling and meaningful experiences to diverse audiences and toward multiple ways of developing and sharing perspectives on Native American art. Collecting goals, exhibition paradigms, and interpretive strategies have changed over the past 210 years, but encouraging people to discover and explore the rich interconnections among artistic and cultural expressions of the past and present remains at our very core. Thank you very much.